I'm going to tell you something that happened to me and my partner during our winter patrol in the northern wilderness. You can believe it or not, but I'm telling you exactly what we saw and did. This was 3 winters ago, and I still think about it every day. We had been out in the backcountry for 4 days already, checking on remote cabins and winter trails after one of the worst blizzards we'd seen in years. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow across the entire region, and our job was to make sure nobody was stranded, check for storm damage, and assess how the wildlife was handling the brutal conditions. The cold that week was unlike anything I'd experienced in my 2 years as a ranger. We're talking minus 25 during the day, probably closer to minus 40 at night with the wind chill. The kind of cold where your breath freezes instantly and falls to the ground like snow, where exposed skin can get frostbite in under 5 minutes, where even the trees crack and pop from the freeze. My partner had been doing this job for 15 years. He'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at you: avalanches, flash floods, bear attacks, people lost for weeks in whiteout conditions. Nothing fazed him anymore. He moved through that frozen landscape like it was his natural habitat, reading signs in the snow and ice that I was still learning to recognize. We were about 40 miles from the nearest maintained road, following what used to be an old logging trail but was now just a gap between the trees. The snow was knee-deep in most places, deeper in the drifts where the wind had piled it against fallen logs and rock outcroppings. Our snowshoes were the only thing keeping us from sinking completely, and even then, every step was work. The silence out there was absolute, not just quiet, silent in a way that made your ears ring. No birds, no wind, no distant traffic. Just the crunch of snow under our feet and the sound of our own breathing. When you stopped moving, you could hear your heartbeat, your pulse in your ears. It was the kind of silence that makes you whisper even when there's no reason to be quiet. We were checking animal signs, looking for tracks and trails to assess how the local wildlife was dealing with the severe weather. The deer were yarded up in the thickest cover they could find. We'd found a few elk tracks, but they were old, from before the last snowfall. Most of the smaller animals seemed to have gone deep into whatever shelter they could find and were waiting out the worst of it. That's when we started noticing the strange tracks. At first, my partner thought they might be from a very large bear. The prints were huge, much bigger than anything we'd seen before. But bears do get big in this part of the country. What was odd was that they were so fresh. Most bears should have been denned up weeks ago, deep in hibernation. Finding tracks this time of year, especially in these conditions, just didn't make sense. The tracks were spaced oddly too far apart for a bear walking normally, but not quite right for a bear running either. And there was something about the shape that bothered my partner. He kept kneeling down to examine them more closely, measuring them with his gloved hands, taking pictures with his phone. We followed the trail for maybe half a mile. It led through some of the densest forest in the area, places where the snow wasn't as deep because the tree canopy had caught most of it. Whoever or whatever had made these tracks knew the terrain well, taking the path of least resistance through the wilderness like an expert tracker. The tracks led us to a section of forest that felt different somehow, older. The trees were massive here, old growth that had somehow escaped the logging operations from decades past. Some of them had to be 3 or 4 feet across at the base, towering up into the gray sky like natural monuments. The silence here was even deeper, more profound. That's when we heard the first sound. It came from maybe a quarter mile ahead, echoing off the massive tree trunks and bouncing around until we couldn't tell exactly where it originated. It wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a scream. Something between pain and rage, but deeper than anything I'd ever heard. It made something primitive in my brain wake up and start screaming that we needed to run. My partner stopped dead in his tracks and held up his hand for silence. We'd both heard bears before, plenty of times. We'd heard wolves, mountain lions, elk in rutting season. This was different. This was something massive in serious distress, and it was close enough that we could feel the sound as much as hear it. The sound came again, longer this time, more desperate. It was definitely coming from ahead of us, in the direction the tracks were leading. My partner looked at me, and I could see him weighing our options. We were armed, both carried sidearms, and he had a rifle. But against something that could make a sound like that, I wasn't sure weapons would matter much. We approached slowly, moving from tree to tree, using the massive trunks for cover. The tracks in the snow were getting more erratic now, deeper in some places, like whatever was making them was stumbling. There were other marks too, scrape marks on tree bark, broken branches, places where something large had been thrown or had fallen hard enough to leave impressions in the snow. The sound came a third time, weaker now, but still carrying that note of pain and rage. We were getting close to whatever was making it. My partner motioned for me to stay back while he moved ahead to scout. I watched him disappear behind a cluster of pine trees, heard his sharp intake of breath, then his urgent gesture for me to come forward. The scene that greeted us in that clearing is burned into my memory forever. Blood everywhere in the snow. Dark red patches scattered across maybe 50 feet, some of it steaming slightly in the frigid air. Tree bark was torn off in long strips, hanging like ribbons from trunks that were 2 feet thick. Branches the size of a man's leg were snapped and hanging, some of them 20 feet off the ground. The snow was churned up like a battlefield, packed down and stained in a pattern that spoke of a massive, violent struggle. And there, about a dozen meters away, was a grizzly bear. Dead, its massive body was crumpled against a fallen log, neck clearly broken, head twisted at an unnatural angle. This wasn't just any bear, it was huge, probably close to 600 pounds, an old male in its prime. The kind of bear that was apex predator in these woods that nothing else would dare challenge. But that wasn't what made us both freeze in our tracks and forget how to breathe. Sitting propped against a large pine tree, maybe 30 feet from the dead bear, was something I'd never imagined I'd see outside of blurry photos and campfire stories. 8 feet tall, even sitting down, covered head to toe in dark brown hair that was matted with blood and snow. Its shoulders were broader than any human's, broader than they had any right to be. Its arms were longer than they should be, hanging down past where its knees would be if it were standing. The face was the worst part. It was like looking at something that was almost human but had gone down a different evolutionary path millions of years ago. The brow ridge was massive, jutting out over eyes that were deep-set and intelligent. The nose was flat, almost pig-like, but the mouth was somewhere between human and ape. When it breathed, I could see teeth that were designed for more than just eating plants. It was watching us, had been watching us probably since we entered the clearing. Those eyes followed our every movement, calculating, deciding if we were a threat or just another curiosity. There was intelligence there, unmistakable intelligence, but alien enough that I couldn't predict what it might do next. The creature's breathing was labored, visible in the cold air. Deep gashes ran across its chest and arms where the bear's claws had found their mark. Its left leg was twisted at an odd angle, and there were puncture wounds on its thigh that could only have come from the bear's teeth. Dark blood was still seeping from multiple wounds, staining the snow beneath it in an ever-widening circle. My first instinct was to run. Every fiber in my body was screaming to get out of there, to put as much distance between us and this thing as possible. This creature had just killed a 600-pound grizzly bear with its bare hands. The evidence was right there in the snow, scattered in pieces across 50 feet of forest floor. Whatever this was, it was stronger than anything that should exist. But my partner was having a different reaction. He was looking at it like he would any injured animal we'd come across on patrol. His hand was moving slowly toward his pack, not for his weapon, but for his first aid supplies. I wanted to grab his arm and drag him away from there, but something in the creature's posture stopped me. It wasn't acting aggressive, despite being something that could probably tear us both apart without much effort. It wasn't showing any signs of hostility. It was hurt, exhausted, and probably as scared of us as we were of it. The way it held itself against the tree, the labored breathing, the careful way it watched our movements. This was a creature that had used everything it had in that fight with the bear and had nothing left for another confrontation. My partner pulled out our first aid kit, not the basic supplies most people carry hiking, but the serious trauma kit we use for backcountry emergencies. Chest seals, combat gauze, serious antibiotics, the kind of supplies that could keep someone alive until a helicopter could get them to a hospital. He looked at me, then at the creature, then started walking slowly toward it. I wanted to tell him he was insane. This thing had just demonstrated that it could kill one of the most dangerous predators in North America. But something in its eyes, something in the way it held itself, made it clear it wasn't looking for another fight. It was hurt, confused, and probably wondering if we were going to try to finish what the bear had started. My partner got to within about 10 feet before the creature made a sound. Not the roar we'd heard earlier, but something lower, more controlled. A warning, but not an aggressive one. More like it was saying, "That's close enough for now." He stopped immediately, knelt down in the snow, and opened the medical kit where the creature could see what he was doing. The creature's eyes tracked every movement as my partner pulled out supplies. Antiseptic, gauze pads, medical tape, bottles of pills. He held each item up where the creature could see it, moving slowly and deliberately, like you might with a wounded dog that wasn't sure if you were going to help or hurt it. The creature's massive head tilted slightly as it watched this display. Those intelligent eyes moved from the supplies to my partner's face, then back to the supplies. You could almost see it thinking, trying to understand what was being offered. Its breathing was getting more labored, and I could see that blood loss was becoming a serious problem. Whatever decision it was going to make, it needed to make it soon. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, the creature shifted slightly against the tree. Not toward us, not away, just repositioning itself like it was getting ready for something. My partner took it as permission to come closer. He moved like he was approaching a wounded wild animal, which I guess he was. Slow, deliberate movements, constantly watching for signs of distress or aggression. The creature never took its eyes off him, but it didn't try to stop him as he closed the distance between them. Up close, the wounds were worse than they'd looked from a distance. The bear had gotten in some serious damage before going down. 3 parallel gashes ran from the creature's left shoulder down to its elbow, deep enough that I could see muscle and fat underneath the torn skin. There were smaller cuts and scrapes all over its arms and torso where the bear's claws had raked across it. But the worst was a puncture wound on its thigh about the size of a bear's canine tooth that was still bleeding slowly. My partner started with the shoulder wounds. He poured antiseptic on a gauze pad, looked at the creature, and made a gesture like he was about to apply it. The creature watched him, then gave what I swear was a small nod. The moment the antiseptic hit the wound, the creature's entire body went rigid. It let out a sound that made my teeth ache and my bones vibrate, a sound of pure pain that echoed off the trees and seemed to go on forever. Its massive hand shot out faster than I could follow and grabbed my partner's wrist. For a terrifying second, I thought we were both dead. Those fingers wrapped completely around his arm like it was a child's, and I could see the muscles under that dark hair bunching up with enough power to crush bone. The creature could have snapped his wrist like kindling, could have torn his arm off at the shoulder without breaking a sweat. But it didn't. It held him there, staring into his eyes with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. I could see it making a decision, weighing whether this pain was worth whatever benefit it thought might come from letting us continue. The grip was firm but not crushing, more like it was saying, "Be careful," than threatening harm. Then, slowly, deliberately, it released his wrist and leaned back against the tree. The message was clear, so it would tolerate the pain, but we needed to be aware of what we were asking of it. My partner waited a few seconds, letting the creature settle, then continued cleaning the wound. Every time the antiseptic stung, the creature would tense up, sometimes making that low rumbling sound, but it never tried to stop him again. It was like it understood that the pain was necessary, that we were trying to help even though what we were doing hurt. The cleaning took almost 20 minutes. The wounds were dirty, full of bark fragments and pine needles from the fight, and each piece had to be carefully removed. The creature watched every step of the process, occasionally making soft sounds of pain but never becoming aggressive. Its eyes followed my partner's hands, tracking every movement with the focus of something trying to learn. The puncture wound on its leg was the worst. It was deep, probably down to the bone, and had clearly been bleeding for a while. My partner cleaned it as best he could, but we both knew it needed more than field dressing. This was the kind of wound that could get infected easily, and infected wounds killed more animals in the wilderness than predators did. That's when my partner made a decision that could have gone very wrong. He pulled out a bottle of antibiotic pills, the heavy-duty ones we carried for serious infections. These weren't over-the-counter pain relievers. These were serious antibiotics that could fight off the kind of bacteria that thrived in deep tissue wounds. He showed the bottle to the creature, shook it so it could hear the pills rattle inside, then made an exaggerated swallowing motion, pointing to his mouth and then to the creature. The creature's eyes followed the demonstration, but his expression was skeptical at best. It took the bottle when my partner offered it, those massive fingers handling the small container with surprising delicacy. It examined it from every angle, shook it to hear the contents move around inside, even sniffed at it through the closed cap. Then it looked back at my partner, who repeated the swallowing gesture and held up 3 fingers, trying to indicate dosage. The creature studied the bottle for another long moment, then unscrewed the cap. It poured 3 pills into its palm, pills that looked tiny in that massive hand, and studied them closely. It looked at us again, and I held my breath, wondering if it would trust us enough to put something foreign into its body. It did. It tossed the pills back and swallowed them dry, barely seeming to notice them going down. My partner nodded approvingly and made a gesture indicating that it should take more later, pointing at the sun and making motions to show daily doses. The creature seemed to understand, tucking the bottle somewhere in the thick hair on its chest where we couldn't see it. We finished dressing the wounds we could reach, wrapping the worst cuts in gauze and medical tape. The creature tolerated all of it, even helping by holding its arm steady or shifting position to give us better access to a wound. But there were more problems becoming apparent as we worked. The creature's feet were torn up badly, probably from trying to maintain its footing during the fight with the bear on the icy, uneven ground. Deep cuts crossed the soles of both feet, and one ankle looked seriously swollen. When it tried to shift its weight to stand up, it immediately collapsed back against the tree with a sound of frustration and pain. That's when the real problem hit us. We couldn't just patch it up and walk away. In its current condition, this creature was basically a sitting duck. For every predator in the area, word would get out somehow. Scavengers would find the blood trail, catch the scent of injury and weakness. Wolves, especially, were smart enough to recognize an opportunity when they saw one. No matter how intimidating this thing was, wounded and immobile, it wouldn't survive a pack attack. My partner was looking around the clearing, and I could see him working through the same problem in his head. We needed to get it mobile somehow, get it to shelter where it could heal properly. But it probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds, and we were miles from our truck, even if we could somehow transport it. The creature seemed to understand our dilemma. It was watching us discuss the situation, and there was something almost human about the frustration in its eyes. It knew it was in trouble, knew that staying in this exposed position was essentially a death sentence, but it couldn't see a solution any more than we could. That's when my partner had his idea. He started walking around the clearing, examining fallen branches, looking for specific shapes and sizes. The storm that had brought us out here had also brought down a lot of deadfall, and he was searching through it like he was shopping for something particular. He found what he was looking for about 30 feet from where the creature sat. 2 sturdy branches that had broken off in a Y shape during some old windstorm, each one about 6 feet long and thick enough to support significant weight. They looked like natural crutches, almost like they'd been designed for the purpose. He brought them back to where I was standing with the creature, picked up a smaller stick from the ground, and started demonstrating. He put the stick under his arm like a crutch, hobbled around in a small circle, then offered the demonstration stick to the creature. The creature watched this performance with obvious interest. Those intelligent eyes followed every movement, and you could practically see it working out the mechanics in its head. It took the smaller stick when offered, examined it closely, then looked at the larger branches my partner had found. Understanding the concept and implementing it were 2 different things, though. The creature tried to position the demonstration stick under its arm, but the proportions were all wrong for something its size. My partner positioned the 2 large branches next to the creature, showed it how to grip them, how to position them under its massive arms for maximum support. The creature seemed to grasp the idea, but getting it upright was going to be the challenge. This thing was huge, and dead weight is always harder to move than you expect. My partner looked at me, and I could see him calculating angles and leverage points like an engineer working out a complex problem. We decided to try using the tree as a brace. My partner got behind the creature, braced his back against the tree trunk, and positioned his feet against the creature's lower back. I got on the other side, grabbed one of its massive arms, and prepared to help lift. The creature, understanding what we were trying to do, positioned the makeshift crutches and prepared to push up with its good leg. The first attempt was a complete failure. The creature was just too heavy, and we couldn't generate enough leverage to get it more than a few inches off the ground. It settled back against the tree with a frustrated grunt, looking at us like it was wondering if we had any better ideas. The second attempt went a little better. We got it maybe halfway up before our combined strength gave out, and it sank back down. But it was trying now, really putting effort into helping us, and that made a difference. On the 3rd try, something clicked. The creature managed to get its good leg positioned just right, and when we pushed, it was able to contribute enough force to make the difference. It rose up the tree trunk like a mountain being born, swaying dangerously for a moment before finding its balance against the makeshift crutches. For a terrifying second, I thought it was going to topple over backward and crush us both. It swayed like a tree in a high wind, overcorrected, swayed the other way. But then it found its center of gravity and stood there, breathing hard but upright, looking almost as surprised as we were that the plan had worked. The relief on its face was unmistakable, not just physical relief from changing position, but something deeper. Hope, maybe. The knowledge that it wasn't completely helpless, that it might actually survive this ordeal. It adjusted its grip on the crutches, testing their strength, getting a feel for how much weight they could support. Now we had a mobile creature, but we still didn't know where it needed to go. The clearing where we'd found it wasn't suitable for a long recovery. Too exposed, too much blood scent to attract other predators, We needed to find it shelter, somewhere defensible where it could heal in peace. We started talking through our options. There were cave systems in the area, natural shelters that might work. We could try to build some kind of lean-to, though in this weather that would be a massive undertaking. Maybe there was an abandoned cabin or structure somewhere nearby that could provide temporary shelter. We were standing there debating the logistics, pointing at different areas of the forest and discussing the pros and cons of various locations, when the creature made a sound that stopped us both mid-sentence. It was looking at us intently, and when we stopped talking, it made the sound again. A grunt, but purposeful, almost like it was trying to get our attention. It struggled to lift one arm while still supporting itself on the crutch and pointed deeper into the forest with one massive finger. We looked where it was pointing, a section of forest that looked no different from any other to our eyes, then back at its face. The creature nodded, actually nodded like a human would, and made the same gesture again. It wasn't just pointing randomly, it was indicating a specific direction, a particular destination. The implications hit us both at the same time. This creature knew where it wanted to go. It had a destination in mind, somewhere it considered safe or defensible or home. It was asking us to help it get there. My partner looked at me, and I could see the decision being made in his eyes. We'd already committed to helping this thing by treating its wounds. We couldn't stop halfway and leave it stranded in an open clearing where anything could find it. If it knew where it needed to go, we were going to help it get there. What followed was one of the most physically and emotionally challenging experiences of my life. The creature could move, but barely. Each step was agony for it, and it needed constant support to keep from falling. We worked out a system where my partner would walk on its left side, helping to bear some of its weight when it stumbled, while I scouted ahead to find the easiest path through the snow and undergrowth. The creature's method of walking was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It would plant both crutches ahead of itself, lean its weight forward, then swing its legs through in a kind of controlled fall. The good leg would take most of the impact while the injured leg barely touched the ground. It was exhausting to watch, and I couldn't imagine how much pain each step must have cost it. Every 20 or 30 steps, we had to stop and let it rest. It would lean heavily on the crutches, breathing hard, sometimes making soft sounds of pain that cut right through me. Steam rose from its body in the cold air, and I could see that the exertion was opening up some of the wounds we'd just dressed. Dark spots were beginning to show through the white gauze. But it never complained, never gave up. It would rest for a minute or two, then struggle forward again, always in the direction it had originally pointed. Sometimes it would correct our course slightly, indicating that we should angle more to the left or right, like it was following a mental map of the terrain. The forest got thicker as we went deeper into the wilderness. We were climbing now, following what might have been an animal trail, but was mostly just the path of least resistance through the trees. The snow got deeper in places where the wind had created drifts, and we had to break trail for the creature, stomping down a path it could follow with its makeshift crutches. I began to worry about my partner. He was doing most of the work supporting the creature's weight, and I could see the strain it was putting on him. His face was red with exertion, and frost was building up in his beard from his labored breathing. We were both dressed for cold weather patrol, not for manual labor in sub-zero temperatures. If either of us got injured or exhausted to the point where we couldn't help, we'd all be in serious trouble. The creature seemed to sense our growing fatigue. It started trying to support more of its own weight, pushing harder with the crutches to reduce the load on my partner. Sometimes it would gesture for us to rest when it saw us struggling, even though I knew every delay was costing it in terms of pain and energy expenditure. After about 30 minutes of this grueling progress, we hit a section where the terrain got significantly steeper. We were climbing up what was essentially a hillside now, and the snow was deeper and less stable. Each step forward risked sliding backward, and the creature's crutches were starting to punch through the snow crust and get stuck. This was where we almost lost it. The creature planted its right crutch for what should have been a routine step, but the snow gave way underneath it. It started to fall backward, all that massive weight about to come crashing down the hill. My partner lunged forward and grabbed its arm, trying to arrest the fall, but there was no way he could support that much weight on the steep slope. For a terrible moment, I thought we were going to watch this creature tumble down the hillside and undo all the work we'd done to get it this far. But somehow, it managed to get the other crutch planted firmly enough to stop the slide. It hung there for a few seconds, balanced precariously between falling backward and moving forward, before finding enough purchase to continue climbing. The rest of the ascent was a nightmare of slow, careful steps and frequent rest stops. We had to test every foot placement, make sure the crutches were solidly planted, before allowing the creature to put its weight on them. My partner was practically carrying half its weight by the end, and I was breaking trail and clearing obstacles ahead of us to make the path as easy as possible. Just when I was beginning to wonder if we'd bitten off more than we could chew, the creature stopped and made an urgent sound. We looked where it was pointing and saw nothing at first, just more trees, more snow. A jumbled pile of fallen logs and branches that looked like it had been there for years. But the creature was insistent. It struggled forward another few steps and pointed again, more specifically this time. That's when I saw what it was indicating, a gap in the fallen logs, barely visible unless you were looking for it from exactly the right angle. It was an opening, camouflaged so perfectly that it looked like natural debris from a distance. Getting the creature through the entrance was like trying to thread a needle with a telephone pole. The opening was narrow, probably just wide enough for the creature to fit through if it ducked down and turned sideways. But doing that while managing the crutches and dealing with its injuries was going to be nearly impossible. We ended up having to go through a complex choreographed sequence. First, we passed the crutches through the opening to the other side. Then the creature had to get down on its hands and knees, which was agony with its injured leg, and crawl through the gap. My partner and I helped guide it through, making sure it didn't snag on any of the branches or rocks that form the camouflaged entrance. Once we were all through the opening, we found ourselves in a natural antechamber that led to a much larger space beyond. The creature struggled to its feet again, retrieved its crutches, and led us deeper into what was clearly a cave system. What we found when we got to the main chamber stopped us both in our tracks. This wasn't just a cave where some animal had taken shelter. This was a home. The space was larger than most apartments, a natural cavern that opened up into multiple chambers and alcoves. But it was what the creature had done with the space that amazed us. The walls were decorated with arrangements of sticks and stones, patterns that were clearly intentional and artistic. Some were simple geometric designs, others were more complex, almost like primitive murals telling stories I couldn't understand. Along one wall, different types of leaves and moss had been arranged in what looked like a classification system. Some were fresh, others were dried and preserved, arranged by color and texture like a natural library. There were sections for different types of bark, different kinds of stones, even what looked like collections of different animal fur and feathers. The floor was covered with woven mats made from grass and thin branches, intricate patterns that must have taken hours to create. In one corner was what could only be described as a bed, layers of pine boughs that had been carefully selected and arranged, covered with soft grasses and what looked like pieces of fur from various animals. It was comfortable looking, designed for something the creature's size and proportions. But it was the tools that really drove home the intelligence we were dealing with. Sharp stones that had been worked into specific shapes, some clearly for cutting, others for scraping or digging. pieces of wood that had been carved and shaped for particular purposes, some of them showing wear patterns from regular use. Everything showed signs of planning, of a creature that thought about problems and created solutions. There were food preparation areas too. Flat stones that had been arranged like primitive countertops, with cutting tools arranged nearby. Clay vessels that had been shaped by hand and hardened somehow, probably for storing water or food. Even what looked like a rudimentary hearth area where fires could be safely built without filling the cave with smoke. The creature made its way to the sleeping area and collapsed onto it with obvious relief. It arranged the crutches within easy reach and looked back at us. And for the first time since we'd found it, I saw something like peace in its expression. It was home in its own space, surrounded by things it had made with its own hands. My partner and I stood there for a few minutes, taking in the magnitude of what we'd discovered. This wasn't just some unknown animal. This was a being with culture, with intelligence, with the ability to modify its environment in sophisticated ways. The implications were staggering. The creature was watching us examine its home, and I got the sense that it was proud of what it had created. There was something almost human about the way it seemed to be showing off its accomplishments, like a homeowner giving visitors a tour. But we also realized that we were intruders here. This was its private space, its sanctuary, and we didn't belong. My partner seemed to sense this too, because he took a step back and gave a small bow, just a slight inclination of his head, acknowledging the creature in its own domain. The creature's eyes met his, then mine, and I swear it understood the gesture. There was recognition there, gratitude, maybe even a kind of respect. It nodded back, a single deliberate movement, and settled deeper into its bed. We left quietly, backing out of the cave and carefully rearranging the camouflage so the entrance was hidden again. Neither of us spoke until we were well away from the area, both of us processing what we had just experienced. The walk back to our truck was surreal. We kept stopping to look back, half expecting to see the creature following us, or to wake up and discover the whole thing had been some kind of hypothermia-induced hallucination. But the evidence was there in our medical kit. Supplies used, gauze and antiseptic missing. The creature's blood was still on our gloves. The discussion we had on the drive back to town changed both of our lives. We knew we couldn't tell anyone about what we'd found. The scientific community would go crazy trying to study it. The media would turn it into a circus, and the creature would lose the privacy and safety it needed to recover. But we also couldn't just walk away and pretend nothing had happened. The creature was badly injured, facing the worst part of winter in a remote location. We had no idea what kind of food stores it might have had, or whether it would be able to hunt and forage in its current condition. Looking at that cave, we hadn't seen any sign of stored food. No caches of preserved meat, no stockpiles of nuts or dried fruits. Everything suggested that it lived day to day, hunting and gathering as needed. In its current condition, that wasn't going to be possible. It wouldn't be able to travel far from the cave, wouldn't be able to chase down prey or even forage effectively. Without intervention, it would probably starve to death before its wounds healed enough for it to be mobile again. We made a decision that day that we kept to for the rest of that winter. We would make regular supply runs to the area, bringing food and whatever other supplies might help it survive the recovery period. We didn't know exactly what it ate, but we figured it was probably omnivorous like early humans would have been. Meat, fruits, vegetables, whatever it could find in the wild. The logistics were challenging. We were talking about hiking 40 miles into the wilderness every few days, carrying significant amounts of food, without arousing suspicion from our supervisors or co-workers. We worked out a system where we would take turns, claiming we were doing extended solo patrols to check on remote areas affected by the storm damage. The first supply run was 2 days later. We brought a variety of things: canned meat, dried fruits, nuts, vegetables that would keep in the cold. We didn't dare go all the way back to the cave entrance. We didn't want to disturb the creature or make it feel like its territory was being invaded. Instead, we found a spot about 50 yards away in a small clearing that would be visible from the cave, but not obvious to any other animals that might pass through. We left the supplies there and marked the spot by arranging some stones in a small cairn, figuring the creature was intelligent enough to notice the marker and investigate. Then we left and came back 3 days later to see what had happened. The food was gone, all of it. The cairn had been dismantled and rebuilt in a slightly different pattern, like a message saying the gift had been received and understood. We took it as confirmation that our plan was working. This became our routine for the rest of the winter. Every few days, one of us would make the long trek back to the supply drop location, bringing whatever food we could manage. We tried to vary the offerings, sometimes canned goods, sometimes fresh meat from our own hunting, sometimes fruits and vegetables we bought in town and could transport without spoiling. We never saw the creature during these supply runs, but there were signs that it was doing better. The food always disappeared within a day or two of being left, and sometimes we would find tracks in the snow around the drop site. Not the stumbling, painful tracks we'd followed that first day, but more confident prints that suggested improved mobility. After about 3 weeks of this routine, we found something new at the drop site. Small objects made from twigs and grass, woven. For more interesting stories, check this out.